I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Good afternoon on this second full day of Parinirvana Sesshin. On day 2, you may be asking yourself, what have I done? Why am I doing this? Is this it? How am I doing? Maybe this isn't it. When we live in that assumption that this isn't it, this creates the ideal conditions for "are we there yet?" to arise. Is there an idea, maybe quite apparent, maybe subtle, that this isn't it? That our real life is dangling somewhere in front of us? That our real life will begin someday when we finally get our act together, when we finally become who we are supposed to be, a much cooler and more confident version of this. A life that flows. A morning routine that is Instagram ready. When we figure out what we want to do when we grow up, when we meet the right person, when we have that crashing insight, when we lose that extra weight, when we change our career, when we get married, when we get published, when we find the perfect teacher, when the kids graduate, when we enter perfect samadhi, when we stop being so scared of everything, when we truly awaken, maybe day 4 of Sesshin, when we retire. Are we there yet? Sesshin is an invitation to arrive, to actually be here. Even just to see the effects of this isn't it, and to challenge that. And not just to say this is it, but to ask, what is this? We get still and quiet, at least on the outside. We look closely and see that nothing is what we thought. It seems like everything changes, and nothing will ever stay within the bounds of our fixed ideas without leaking out somehow. Nothing can ever match our idea because our idea is only 2-dimensional at best. So we sit still, we feel the breath, we feel the body, and life just keeps not conforming to my idea. Insisting on my idea, this isn't it, is the recipe for suffering, for disengagement. We can try to fix it by controlling everything, try to fix ourselves, try to fix conditions, change other people, to bend life to our will, to make it match our idea. And how does that go? We can't even control our own breath. We can't even control our own mind, not to mention old age, sickness, and death. So how do we work with that? How do we relate to that? these teachings seem to suggest that we can be free from suffering. Free from sorrow and lamentation, I believe, is the promise of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Free from sorrow and lamentation. These 4 foundations start with deep contemplation of the body. Not contemplation like thinking about the body, but practicing awareness of the body in the body. The breath in the breath. It includes reflections on the impermanence of the body and how the body ages and decays, how it dies. And it recommends charnel ground reflections, going into the place where bodies decompose and just looking at them. These are very specific instructions, and we are practicing this week to the extent that we're able. As Kisei introduced, the 7 sisters in the charnel ground set out this way, planning to go to a park and view the spring blossoms, a pleasant, pretty, floral springtime activity, like normal people, until one of them offers a serious detour to the charnel ground instead. Let's go there. The charnel ground, where dead bodies are left to decompose. She says there are good things there. How can this be? How can this be? Contemplating dead bodies? Speaking of bodies, we talk a lot about embodiment. Why is that? When we point to embodiment in meditation, maybe it's this tingling aliveness, this trustworthy connection to and non-separation from the earth. It's sometimes described as grounding. It can be experienced that way, a reassuring kind of feeling. And yet embodiment can be a lot more than that. Truly embracing embodiment, we embrace old age, sickness, and death. That's part of the deal. And we embrace discomfort, physical, and perhaps emotional. Turning towards embodiment, we can experience how this physical body cannot be anywhere but right here, right now. And yet, our experience is so often anything but Instagrammable. Not pretty. That's when we suffer, when we think it should be different than it is. Maybe you are noticing and experiencing the evidence of old age. And if you haven't yet, then you can just call yourself an old person in training, if you're lucky. Some of us are getting through that curriculum a little faster than we thought. Probably talented and gifted. Our practice is called training. We practice in letting go. We practice in observing impermanence, orienting to this simple reality. With that understanding, there can be less struggle, less fighting with reality. There can still be some of that. There can still be grief. But can we be malleable to that? Can we, in recognition of the way things are, can we bow to what is? Can we put our bodies on the floor, put our foreheads on the floor, surrender? Put down our thinking minds, our ideas of should and should not, and align with the ground. Give up. Humility has the same root as the word humus, as dirt, as earth, as human. This is where we're headed. We're not getting something in this transaction. If we're lucky, we're losing. Letting go. Practicing being with what is. Training in this is it. Where else could it be? When else could it be? The degree of our grasping and arguing will always be revealed. Wherever we find sorrow and lamentation, that is the place to look. That is where we'll find our grasping and arguing. We look there not as a search and destroy mission, but a tender exploration of our humanity. With the curiosity of the seven sisters, we approach. There are good things there. And then the inquiry, the curiosity. There's a person's body. Where has the person gone? Where is that 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 16-year-old, 22-year-old, 50-year-old? Where has the person gone? What is so aversive about loss, old age, sickness, and death? I'd like to share a couple of passages from a book entitled Death, The End of Self-Improvement by Joan Tollefson. Joan Tollefson is a teacher of the non-dual. She was a student of Tony Packer, who trained at Rochester Zen Center at the same time that Hogen Roshi did. Joan Tollefson went on to study with a variety of teachers, including Zen teachers Mel Weitzman and Charlotte Joko Beck. She's had a very colorful life, living through many of the joys and difficulties of the baby boomer generation. And she brings the experiences of being queer, experiencing addiction and recovery, taking care of her dying mother and grieving her death, living with anal cancer, and writing and sharing about it unflinchingly, including everything. She says, "We often have the idea that dignity means being in control, not being overwhelmed by emotion, not screaming or crying in pain, not losing control of our bowels, not vomiting on ourselves or peeing in our pants, not losing our minds, and so on. Most of us are conditioned to feel that bodily functions and emotions are a bit dirty or unspiritual and best hidden away. At the very least, they must be controlled. As we age, and for some people, much sooner in the wake of an illness or a disability, all this begins to crumble away. We may start having falls or losing our cognitive skills. We may not be able to function independently anymore. We may need help, sometimes with very intimate tasks. We may lose bowel control, perhaps in a crowded restaurant while eating Sunday brunch with a large group of friends. That happened to my mother in the last year of her life. If you've been with people who are dying, you know that there are usually body fluids involved and all sorts of messy things that don't fit our limited and unreal picture of dignity. We may end up in bed, in a nursing home, in restraints, in terror, screaming. This happened to a friend's father. I have an ostomy bag now, following an anal cancer. And I've had some pretty messy moments while managing the bag one-handed. I lost my right hand before birth. Are all these events undignified? Are they humiliating? Or are they simply part of life? Growing old is a natural and unavoidable fact of life that we are constantly trying to deny, hide, or cover up with wishful thinking, hair dye, Botox, erectile dysfunction drugs, cosmetic surgery, euphemisms, and inspirational stories about age-defying 90-year-old superheroes who are still skydiving and having hot sex. All of this promotes the popular notion that we can always be young and healthy and at the top of our game. I'm all for staying fit, challenging ourselves, enjoying life to the fullest, and having a positive attitude towards old age. But in the final analysis, growing old is one long surrender. Letting go into a process of subtraction and unraveling. A demolition project in which things fall apart and every form we know and love is lost. It usually involves some degree of physical pain and isn't always pretty or easy. Old age is an adventure in uselessness, loss of control, being nobody, and giving up everything. That sounds quite dreadful when we've been conditioned to believe that we must be somebody, that we must strive to get better and better, that our lives must have purpose and meaning, that above all we must be useful and productive and always doing something and getting somewhere. Joan Tollefson. So the Buddha in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra says this: "Now I am frail, Ananda, old, aged, far gone in years. This is my 80th year, and my life is spent. Even as an old cart, Ananda, is held together with much difficulty, so the body of the Tathagata is kept going only with supports." The Buddha meets his own disintegration with forbearance, with candor and simple honesty. It's not a failure. It's just another way he teaches about the way things are. This is it. It's the people around the Buddha who offer us the very human examples of resistance, of this isn't it. Kisei shared from this sutra yesterday and how the Buddha, aware that he is dying, goes on a farewell tour. He had eaten some contaminated food and was dying of dysentery. Imagine this man, this 80-year-old man who walked everywhere, The weather was likely pretty hot. The roads dusty, dirty. Access to clean water not always available. When it's severe, dysentery can sometimes be bloody. He must be exhausted. He must be dehydrated. He keeps asking Ananda to bring him water. He's relinquished his will to live. He would have been needing very intimate personal care. He's dying, and Ananda, his cousin and attendant for 25 years, his disciple who heard and remembered every teaching the Buddha ever gave, goes off to grieve and stands weeping in a doorway. The Buddha asks, "Where bhikkhus is Ananda?" The Venerable Ananda Lord has gone into the vihara and there stands leaning against a doorpost and weeping. He says, "I am still but a learner and still have to strive for my own perfection. But alas, my master, who was so compassionate towards me, is about to pass away." Then the Blessed One asked a certain bhikkhu to bring the Venerable Ananda to him. "Go, bhikkhu, and say to Ananda, 'Friend Ananda, the master calls you.'" "So be it, Lord." And that bhikkhu went and spoke to the Venerable Ananda as the Blessed One had asked him to. And the Venerable Ananda went to the Blessed One, bowed down to him, and sat down on one side. Then the Blessed One spoke to the Venerable Ananda, saying, "Enough, Ananda. Do not grieve. Do not lament. For have I not taught from the very beginning that with all that is dear and beloved there must be change, separation, and severance? Of that which is born, come into being, compounded, and subject to decay, how can one say, 'May it not come to dissolution'? There can be no such state of things." This is it. This is how it is. The Buddha is a spiritual friend, a friend that will tell you the truth. It may not be the truth you want to hear, but it's the truth. If you're lucky in this life, you'll have a friend like that. Maybe you do. Then the Buddha tells Ananda that he wants to go to Kushinagara. When this had been said, the Venerable Ananda spoke to the Blessed One, saying, "Let it not be, Lord, that the Blessed One should pass away in this mean place, this uncivilized township in the midst of the jungle, a mere outpost of the province. There are great cities, Lord, such as Kampa, Ragajaha, Savatthi, Saketa, Kosambi, and Benares. Let the Blessed One have his final passing away in one of those. For in those cities dwell many wealthy nobles and Brahmins and householders who are devotees of the Tathagata, and they will render due honor to the remains of the Tathagata." Ananda is basically saying, this is not it. Anywhere but this place. How about these other better places? We now call this a stage of grief. It's called bargaining. Ananda speaks for us all. The Buddha says, Do not say that, Ananda. Do not say this mean place, this uncivilized township in the midst of the jungle, a mere outpost of the province. And he goes on to describe how this place used to be ruled by a great king who took good care of his people, that the place was prosperous and abundant, and that it resounded unceasingly day and night with 10 sounds, the trumpeting of elephants, the neighing of horses, the rattling of chariots, the beating of drums and tabors, music and song, cheers, the clapping of hands and cries of eat, drink, and be merry. The Buddha can see in a very different way. The Buddha can see how any place is never a fixed place. A place where one lives or dies is always changing, has been one thing or another, will be something else. And we are like this too. This is it. Has always been. Joan Tollefson describes a similar situation as a dear friend and her former lover, Lydia, was dying of melanoma that had metastasized. Joan was with Lydia and Lydia's wife, Teresa, through her death. And through it all, this couple loved to watch MSNBC and grisly crime shows all the time. She says, I drove her to her radiation treatments on many mornings, palliative radiation to the brain. And on that drive one morning, she said to me, it's so interesting how everything is falling away. As her illness progressed, she said many times again, it's so interesting how everything is falling away. And everything did fall away. The former triathlon competitor was using a walker, and then we were feeding her, and then she was in bed, unable to get up. The brilliant woman who had been a writer couldn't always find words anymore, and the words came less and less frequently. Eventually, the Foley catheter was put in, and she could no longer swallow. In the end, she was completely unable to move, unable to speak. It was not unlike being with Mom in her last years, watching them both lose one ability after another until all semblance of independence and control had been stripped away. And strange as it may sound, both times, as this process unfolded, my own fear of this loss of control fell away. As in spiritual awakening, you lose everything, and you discover there's nothing to lose. It was an amazing circle to go from first love, that passionate, fiery, erotic love, charged with desire and jealousy that Lydia and I had back when we were in our late teens and early 20s, to this love at the other end of life that needed nothing and embraced everything. It struck me how both these forms of love were equally earthy and fleshy and full of body fluids and physical intimacy, and yet in such utterly different ways. I would never have imagined that nonstop TV featuring grisly crime dramas and endless political commentary on the presidential primaries could be a peaceful backdrop for someone's deathbed, or that I would actually grow fond of it. But it was surprisingly perfect and peaceful. I would even say it was totally spiritual, because really, what isn't? The spiritual world is full of ideas about how you should die and how you should deal with pain. Many spiritual people think you should die with harp music playing and candles flickering softly, and some believe you should avoid palliative care or antidepressants and deal with all forms of physical and mental pain only with meditative awareness. But Lydia died with MSNBC and weekend crime mysteries, both of which she loved, and with morphine and expensive wine that she sipped from a water bottle. Teresa cared for Lydia with great tenderness, occasionally, affectionately calling her a douchebag. Their two beloved cats, known as the Horribles, slept in bed with Lydia, their faithful dog curled up on the floor beside the bed. Hospice workers came and went, and the room always felt exceptionally peaceful and full of love, MSNBC and all. Lydia was in active dying for an entire week, mostly unconscious, with long pauses between breaths and blood moving through the catheter tube as her kidneys failed. Having been a high-performing athlete, her heart and lungs were in great shape. So as everything else failed, it took these vital organs forever to shut down. As Teresa joked, there are advantages to being out of shape. So this is it. You are here. Take good care of your practice. Turn towards your own direct experience. That's what we're doing here. That's what you can do. You can just do your best. Just keep practicing. This is possible because we're all here doing this together, supporting each other, creating this practice place for each other to really look, to ask this question, what is this? What is this life? To take care of each other. This sesshin is impermanent, like everything. So please offer yourself wholeheartedly. And don't worry about the results. Those are in some non-existent future, and they're none of your business anyway. I'd like to close by offering a simple practice that you can take with you. And it can be at any point as you're moving around in the monastery or going to bed. It can be practiced also with your ongoing breathing and body awareness practice. It's just another noticing, a noticing of birth and death in every moment. So for example, let's think back to lunch. Today's lunch. It's gone. It's dead. It was born. It existed. Everyone at the table, and now it's gone completely. No getting it back. It's transforming into bodies, into poop, into zazen. Every moment is like this. Those beautiful fat snowflakes that were falling a minute ago, gone, dead, water in the ground, transformed. Can we observe how we will look back on this talk in the same way? This talk is almost dead. It was born, it existed, and these words will evaporate, maybe echo in some way, be transformed somehow. Maybe will be played on a podcast or something, but even that too will disappear. So notice these endings and beginnings and transformations that are happening all the time. The next walking period, your encounter with the teacher in Sanzen. You can still be in awareness of body and breath. In fact, each breath is being born and dying, is it not? Each breath closer to our last. So feel free to take this up. Watching the breath. Feeling the body. Appreciating impermanence. What is this? What is this? Thank you.